Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, thanks for joining us. This is our monthly webinar. We do one typically on the third Thursday of every month at 2 o'clock. Today, we're going to talk about roadblocks to overcome when selling your pharmacy. I am Owen Bondurant. I'm a partner in Independent RX. I own, also a co-owner in two pharmacies with Tim Clark, who's also on the call. Um, if you don't know about Independent RX, we have been around. Started the company back in 2014, and we do really do three things. We help people start and buy pharmacies. We do accounting for pharmacies, accounting and tax, along with providing other data. And then we also help people sell pharmacies, which is what this one is about. I'll let my business partner Tim um, introduce himself.
Thanks, Ellen. Good afternoon. My name is Tim Clark. I am a pharmacist. I've been doing this since I was a kid, like Owen. Owen's dad and I were business partners that at one time we both worked for my dad. So we've kind of been together through a long, I think, successful career in pharmacy. We've owned about 30 pharmacies together, and Owen and I were the founding members that started this consulting practice. Basically, we saw a need for people to have some experience when they're going through either a transaction of buying, selling, and operating, and a little bit different than some people out there in that we still own a couple pharmacies, so we know a little bit about what you're going through.
Yes, we do. And just a couple of housekeeping things. We there is a Q&A at the bottom, so if you have questions, just click that button. You can drop questions in there. We'll try to answer them as we go or at the end. We are also recording this, so if you want to come back to it or you miss pieces of it, it'll be on our website and we'll email it out. It'll be on our YouTube channel, etc. So, how this topic came about is we've actually been doing a decent amount of transactions recently. There's been a lot of activity in the market. And we just noticed kind of odd things or things that have changed over the last couple of years that I wouldn't call it like they stop a deal or an acquisition from occurring. Most of the time, it's just more that it can delay um, the transaction. And from a seller standpoint, I mean, selling your business is emotional and stressful. So delays are not something that you really want. And so we just thought we've seen enough of them that have kind of come up that we're like, hey, let's just go through some of these. So we're not going to talk about them in any particular order or importance, but we're going to try to just talk through some things that we've seen to get you mostly thinking about, okay, what are the things that could, create a hiccup here? Am I communicating with the buyer about these things and make sure that you know you're more prepared for an acquisition. So um, I know we're gonna just kind of start on some of them. Tim, which one do you want to start with?
Well, I guess let's start off with one that's near and dear to my heart is you, you know, when you're looking at the regulatory issues when you're buying a pharmacy now, every state has their own different nuances and um, and different sellers and buyers can have different strategies to deal with it. One for instance is that wholesaler requirements, on POAs. That kind of varies per state. Um, and the wholesaler takes a lot of time to set up new accounts. And typically, if you're going to use, or even if you're not using a lender, you should establish your own account if you're the buyer. And if you're the seller, you really don't want someone to have access to what is your accounts, if at all possible. So, like earlier in the process, I think we've got to get people to recognize, that, like, I guess it typically my job is I represent someone who's selling. Owen typically represents someone who's buying. So we kind of, you know, go back and forth and try to figure out what do I need and what does he need, for his client or my client to sell or buy. So it's interesting that, even though, we probably have hundreds of transactions. I mean, each one has a little bit of a ripple, or what we're calling a roadblock to get it completed. So, one of the questions we need to ask early as we get through the, as I guess as we're really working maybe on the APA, okay, what are you going to do? Who's going to be your wholesaler? This is my wholesaler. And, we're all worried about the confidentiality. So, typically, I think most people wait till I've got like a purchase agreement signed. But like, I guess there's kind of a to-do list I think that we have after we get the purchase agreement. Now we'll share that with you before, but we've got to make sure that, let's say that whoever buys your pharmacy can purchase medication. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's the DEA license, the state license, and it all comes back to whatever POA or something you need for the wholesaler to, sometimes you have to have a license before, or at the day of the transaction. Sometimes it's again a power of attorney. Like, what do you think about those obstacles, Owen?
yeah, I think what we're hearing from sellers, right, is well, when I bought it, they just ordered, I took over the wholesale account and kept ordering. Well, and we in particular hear that when there's a stock sale, they just assume, okay, well, you're buying my corp, you'll continue ordering. I the wholesalers, I think, have come under regulatory scrutiny, and they don't like that. They really want the buyer to set up their own account under their name, like, and that process is taking, in some cases, 30, 45 days. That's because now, the wholesaler has to do a controlled substance questionnaire. They have to do a DEA check. They have to do a credit check. They have to, in many cases, they have their own power of attorney they want you to fill out. So you'll have one for the purchase agreement, but then they have their own. So starting that process early, as a seller, I mean, I know there's confidentiality, but at one point or another, you either need to start it earlier or just know if I wait, this is going to delay the process. Um, and there's really not a lot that the wholesalers can do to speed it up much. I mean, they might be able to speed it up by a week or two, but like, they have a process they have to go to now to stay within legal compliance, and, they don't have much choice. So, you know, we just that's coming up a lot, and I think in particular sellers are very surprised that that is the process. And I will tell you, even what 5, 7 years ago, that was not the case. So like, even if you bought your store 10 years ago and now you're selling it, it probably has changed. And I think that segues into some of that licensing issues, because some of those two things go hand in hand. We're seeing a lot of state boards of pharmacy moving to that they need to be notified prior to the sale. They have to sign off on the sale, and a lot of times they're issuing a new license in a stock and in an asset sale. And I mean, in some cases, they're even doing an inspection prior to closing. So, the wholesaler can issue an account on a old license that's going to be inactive. So they're not going to do it because now you need this license. So, you've got to get, though it's not your responsibility as the seller, you know, sometimes the buyers are also aren't aware of this. So, if you work with us, we'll look into this, but like I would encourage you to, call your board and find out what the process is currently. And it's changing a lot. Like, I mean, Tim, how many transactions did you do in Ohio? I mean, 15?
It was probably
Yeah.
more than that, and they
Yeah.
were back in the day they were easy.
It was super easy. Well, now they have to be, you actually have to, the buyer has to submit an application. And in many cases, they're going to do an inspection before you can close. So, yeah.
Which is all affecting the timing and when you're going through a transaction, you got to understand that you have these again regulatory state board issues that I guess that's maybe the beginning of figuring that stuff out. And then the next thing is going to be your wholesaler because they need proper licensing in order to
Yes.
give you an account.
Yep. Uh,
So, and even if you're the seller, I mean, you have to be aware because not everybody has bought a pharmacy before that's buying pharmacies. So like I think what you're bringing up is like we've had people who maybe 5 or 10 years ago bought a pharmacy, and now these regulations have changed since they've done it before. And then, like I know for me as someone who's helping people sell, I've got to do a good job of making sure that the buyer actually knows what they're doing. I mean, you're kind of you're. I think what we end up doing is, and Owen, correct me if I'm wrong, like we're really helping both sides of the transaction because typically people that we're dealing with are just themselves
yeah.
and they don't have any experience.
And I will say sometimes it can be hard to get an answer. So unless you can sit there and call the state board 3 or 4 times and send them an email and to get it like straight up answers, sometimes difficult. It's not always on their website and so forth. So I think you're right. It's just about being aware of that and doing some diligence and asking the buyer where they are. And um, we're seeing also even the DEA. I mean, it used to be you just send a letter in to the DEA. So as a seller, you're required to notify the DEA 14 days prior to the closing via letter. Um, and it used to be you'd send it in and you'd never hear from the DEA. Probably about 25% of the time now, the DEA is calling and doing an inspection prior to the sale. So, like, again, it's a little bit like the states. You've got to stay on that. And, um, you know, they say you have to notify at least 14 days prior, but if you can do it 21 days prior, that probably gives them enough time to get out there and not delay your sale. Um, so we're seeing that. We're also seeing state Medicaids will not allow the Medicaid to go from one to the other, even in a stock sale. So like the buyer may have to apply to Medicaid prior to you selling. And you kind of say, well, is that my problem? But, if they have a seller note, you have employees, et cetera, like if they can't bill Medicaid, they're not setting themselves up for success. And so then that business could falter and go away. So, in a lot of cases, you're picking a seller, one, because they probably pay you a fair price, but two, because you feel like they're the right buyer and you want them to do well. And these are the things that help them do that. And, again, you go to Department of Human Services and read about it and it says nothing about it. And then they buy it and can't bill Medicaid. So these are things that, and we've now put it in our process that every single time we have a transaction, we have someone on our team call all these places and just ask. Because even if we've done a transaction 2 months ago, because it just seems to be changing like this, more so than ever.
Yeah, there's not a lot of black and white when it comes to some of these questions, and whether it's administrators or inspectors or whatever, each one kind of has their own way of doing it or interpreting. Um, which I guess in terms of interpreting things, one things as you're preparing or you're getting ready to sell is, everybody's going to do a UCC search when they're trying to buy your assets,
Yeah.
and it used to be really that typically your UCCs were with your wholesaler and your bank, and that was really easy to see, and for the most part, when you look at somebody's balance sheet, you can kind of guess who these UCCs are going to be with. However, you'd also be surprised how many UCCs are like dormant UCCs, in which, like, let's say you used to be Amerisource or Walsh Doman or something, from years ago, or maybe even Parmet or something. You've got these things that maybe you're not even using these credit facilities anymore, but they come up on your UCC search, and the person who's buying it, I mean, and typically if you're using bank financing, they're looking at those UCCs and they've all got to be satisfied at closing. And then, we've entered a whole Pandora's box where so many of these clients, including myself, have an EIDL loan.
Yeah.
And when you have an EIDL loan, and let's say you own multiple stores or even one store, I mean, the problem is you have to get that fixed or get the SBA to somehow, relieve or, take, partial. You're going to have to do some work to relieve those things, which I think my only reason of bringing that up is those things take weeks, not days.
Yep. And the reason is if you look at like McKesson, Amerisource, SBA, these are huge organizations. So like you're not the only one asking for these things. So, it gets in a queue and it takes a little while for them to sort them. And, a lot of times we hear from sellers, well, I haven't bought from Cardinal in 10 years. I don't owe them any money. Well, that's true, but they have to, in order for the bank to hand over the money, they have to have a letter from Cardinal that says you don't owe them any money. And so, that if you've ever had to deal with anything with any of these companies, it takes a long time. Um, so, we sometimes encourage people, hey, have your attorney run a UCC, or you can do them online. Just have a run a UCC, see if there's anything out there. You can get it cleared early, or just start that process early. But
And really, the biggest thing you can do for us is like know who the contact person at your, whoever is your lien holder, I guess, so that it's easy for everyone to coordinate to get those things satisfied. And typically, again, this is a common practice. UCC liens have to be satisfied like look at your mortgage, like when you're buying
mhm,
a house, it has to go through a process to make sure that there's no liens against your house. It's the same thing for your business.
yeah. And another one we're seeing along with those EIDL loans. I mean, the EIDL loans have become a problem. I mean, they were awesome, but getting them taken care of is, I mean, actually, the EIDL, when you contact them, they're pretty good to work with. It just takes a while. Um, but along those lines is the PPP. So if you've had a PPP loan and the buyer is using an SBA loan, the bank has to see that it was actually forgiven. So like you got to pull that paperwork, show it, show that it's been forgiven because they can't lend. It's like another SBA loan. So they can't pay off, so you got to make sure you have that documentation, or then you got to go hunt it down and you have to find the forgiveness letter and, all this stuff, and it can delay you. And if you haven't gotten forgiveness, well, it's going to have to get paid off. So, you know, it's one of those things where you got to be careful with it. And
And theoretically, you think that if you're getting an SBA loan to buy something, in the let's say the seller has some sort of SBA loan, that they all talk to each other. I mean, they
you know,
don't. I mean, it's not as simple as that. I get a call, the credit manager at let's say ANDA or whoever. There's just a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to these notes, and the biggest thing is that number one, you should know what's on your balance sheet. You should know that these are the people who I have loans with. Those are the easy ones to take off the list because you know who they are. The mysterious ones are the ones that again are these dormant or loans that I've already satisfied that actually haven't been terminated, and that doesn't mean that you didn't pay it off. It just means that the paperwork hasn't been completely submitted, and let's say they happened years ago. I mean, it takes somebody a while to figure out, did this really happen?
Yeah. And there
I mean,
is,
which
and when the buyer is using an SBA loan, there's some weird rules. So, you know, you just want to get out ahead of those things because it can cause the bank not to be able to close in a time. It won't probably ruin the deal, but like they, because EIDL and PPP were technically from the SBA, there's some weird rules about what they can and can't pay off, and it's a bit complicated, but like, they just need to know about those things so that they can get out ahead of it and keep it moving. Um, and we certainly understand from the seller standpoint about confidentiality, just, how much do you share and not share and what, where's the line? But there is some things that they've got, that they've got to, be aware of that can, cause problems down the line. So there is a level of things that you need to share with them. We had a question here. What if there are no loans? Well, that's great because that's one less problem you could possibly have.
but if
However,
you have no loans, you probably still have a UCC. I mean,
yes.
because let's say you're, again, it's with your wholesaler. Even if you're on like good terms with them, they still have a lien against you.
Yeah, we actually had a situation a few years back where the seller had no loans, and that was true. However, they had paid off a loan that they did have early, and the bank didn't clear the UCC.
Yeah.
So it came up on his UCC check as being, still an open loan. And so then he had to call the bank. The bank had to look into it. They couldn't find the loan because it had been paid off, and 2 weeks later, we finally solved it. So, in theory, if you have no loans, it should help, but, um, and you'll take more money home when you sell.
Well, as someone who did transactions, 10, 15 years ago, for myself, it was really easy to satisfy UCC and lien stuffs right before closing. I think the biggest point is trying to emphasize that it's not what it used to be. It just takes longer to get these things satisfied. So even if you've done a transaction before, yes, that's going to help you know what you need to do in this transaction, right? But you're still going to have to do it earlier than what you did before. It just everything takes longer. Again, all I can say is that again, as companies have gotten bigger, they've gotten slower.
Yeah. So this is a great question because I just kind of assumed everyone knew what this was, but what is a UCC? It stands for Uniform Commercial Code, but um, essentially it's a credit check on the business. So it's similar like when you run a credit check on yourself and it tells you all the loans you have and if you were behind on any of them, if you defaulted on any of them. Um, this is the business version of that, essentially. And so it is a central thing that says, okay, you've had all these loans in the past and they're paid off and they've been cleared. Um, it'll say if you owe credit cards money, if you owe wholesalers. So any company you owe money to can report to the Uniform Commercial Code and they can say you owe them money. Um, so that's essentially what it is. That was a good question. When you do all of this and you've been in it all the time, you just kind of start throwing acronyms out there that you just assume everyone knows. Well, thank you for asking. Um, so those are some things to think about. Another thing we've been coming across recently is around, we'll call it real estate. Um, and there's two situations there. There's leasing and there is buying the real estate. So maybe we'll start with leasing. Um, I guess the number one issue we see is the landlords causing problems. So maybe the landlord is like, yes, that's great. You're selling your business. I want to rent it to this bigger group. Or, hey, I'm going to raise the rent by 20%. Now your buyer's having an issue. So the landlords can be a roadblock to you actually selling.
Here, I'll say it. They can be greedy. You know
Yeah,
what can happen in the thing is like they think, oh well, you're going to make so much money selling your business. Well, like what's in it for me?
yeah,
Where you've got to, again, as you're talking to your landlord about like when it does come that you're going to introduce them to a buyer, hey, you probably know. I mean, you got to tell them the truth. You probably know that pharmacy isn't what it used to be. Blah blah blah. And frame the picture that I'm not hitting this grand slam home run by selling my business. Now, if you are, please be quiet and don't tell him that. But secondly, you need to know that's also a negotiation because you don't want what Owen just said, where someone's going to then raise that guy's rent 20% because that can make the deal go south. I mean, lots of these transactions, the financials are tight. And when you throw a change to the financials, then of course what happens that then the bank or the whoever you're working at is going to rerun the numbers.
right. And that could cause a major problem, if not ruin the deal. And, we've also seen landlords just assume you're going to make all this money and they go,
Yep.
my location helped you do that. So in order for me to sign a new lease with the buyer, you need to pay me 50 grand.
Yeah.
Um, and they kind of have you. So, um, going into that, like he said, as almost like you're renegotiating is extremely important and not giving up, showing them the cards. Now, not every landlord is greedy and some are great, but like occasionally we come across problems and don't just assume, your landlord is going to be easy to work with. You also don't know if they're looking to sell the building or they're, you know, have something else going on and it causes them to not want to do the lease or, that kind of thing. So uh, we've seen some issues around leases. It doesn't happen. I mean, it's a smaller percentage of the time, but, don't just assume it's going to go and you again, I think that's great advice. Negotiate as if you're renegotiating it. Um,
And most of your leases out there have, assignability clauses in there. Like if Owen's buying my pharmacy, I mean, there's typically language where it says that, you, you know, a good faith, um, of transferring it, to Owen is or whoever is not going to be withheld. But again, you got to remember that, okay, that new person is going to have to go through a background, a credit check or something to make sure that they're, going to be a good tenant. I mean, they already know you. I mean, maybe you didn't have to sign a personal guarantee, or maybe it's just a business guarantee. Every landlord has different, um, sophistications in terms of how they make sure that they're going to get paid. But when you're going through as the selling it, you just have to first thing I'll tell you is find your lease.
yeah.
Find your lease.
Yeah, read it.
I know like I'm the most
Yeah,
I'm
read
not
it.
the greatest organization person when it comes to finding let's say a car title. Today I had to go get a copy of another car title for some reason. I couldn't find it in my, what I've got like five stupid filing cabinets still. Um, it's probably in one of them, but it's the same thing. And even your emails are such a, um, they are your filing box now, and it's, I don't know, like sometimes this search, that I'm searching through my mail, the words I stick in there have no relation to that. They don't say lease sometimes.
Yeah, they'll say tenant agreement or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be another phraseology that I just don't know. So find your lease. Hopefully you find it quickly, but have it prepared if you're going to sell your business, or again, buying it, you're going to have to look at their lease anyway.
Yeah. And if you're selling the real estate that you own associated with the pharmacy, I think the number one common mistake I see from sellers is they they think of the real estate as part of the pharmacy, and it's just an asset of that. But really what you're doing is a real estate transaction, right? It's not a lot different than selling your house. So, if a bank is going to give a loan for it, it's going to have to appraise for a certain value, right? So if it doesn't appraise enough, then the bank can't give a loan for it. They have to look at things like environmentals, and they have to do the environmental check. They have to do an inspection. Um, they a lot of times have to see if a commercial property is in a flood zone. And you think to yourself as the seller, well, I know it's not in a flood zone. It never has been. They redo these flood zone drawings all the time, and you might be in a flood zone now. Um, and that causes a problem for the buyer because now they have to get different insurance in order to buy it. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, like it's a so so you kind of go, well, what can I do about that? Well, I mean, like, you know, get an appraisal or talk to a realtor and have them run some comps so you can figure out what's my building actually worth, right? And is it in a flood zone? Is it, got another issue? Maybe have an inspection done. I mean, they're a few $100, right? They come out and look at the thing, and so that way you know what's going on. I mean, it's no different than, selling your house. I mean, you would take those steps to try to, maximize the value and make sure it's sold. So, um, I think people just kind of forget that it's actually a piece of real estate that's being purchased. Um, and so, getting out ahead of some of those things can help. Um, and I guess one of the considerations there is you may not want to sell the real estate. You might want to lease it to them for a while, and that would be fine too. But then again, you have to create a lease and, come up with an amount and what does that work and for the buyer and et cetera. So that was probably a lot and feels a little bit overwhelming. And we will tell you that, you know, not every one of these situations comes up in every deal. It's like one of these items comes up or, you know, um, something else comes up. But, if you can just, I guess our always advice is to, as you start the sale process, you probably need to do some of these things earlier in the process than you think. Because if you do
Yeah, and
that,
and
it'll,
and just because these are, we say roadblocks or problems, most of them are easily cured.
yes, they just take time.
The time is the issue that is the common theme of all these things.
Yes. Um, and so that, the number one way to solve that is just start them a little earlier in the process. People get nervous about doing the appraisal. Well, the bank will actually do the appraisal and pay for it. Um, it's just people don't want to do it early because, oh, well, we haven't agreed on this or that. It's like, okay, well, it's a real estate appraisal and it doesn't cost you anything, so let it happen. So, you know, uh, at least if anything, doesn't close, at least you know what the building's worth. So, just we, there is a line where you can start things too early, or it could cause a, um, confidentiality thing. But, starting a little bit early can just actually save you time. So, we have another question here. LLC has two DBAs, pharmacies. Will that be a roadblock in selling one of the DBAs? No. That'll be a schedule to your purchase agreement. It lists out any DBAs that you have. And so the buyer is actually buying both of those. So they get to take them over and it's part of the purchase agreement. And then at closing, their attorney will file a fictitious name filing to take those over. Um,
Right. And if you've got different DBAs in the same company and you're only selling like one of the pharmacies, like let's say you got Tim's Pharmacy and Owen's Pharmacy, they're
yes.
both DBAs. If I'm just buying Owen's, that's the DBA that'll get transferred. And really again, it's paperwork again. Your attorney who should be helping you with your closing will file those things. But
Yes.
it's it's standard.
Yeah, that is not a roadblock, but it is a very good question.
Yep.
At least not currently.
Yeah,
It's not a roadblock.
it
Um,
shouldn't be
but
unless you
yeah,
find out there's no one actually filed the DBA and you got a competitor using it. Then it's a pain in the butt.
yeah, that would be the only thing. But if you have registered DBAs, then at closing there'll be a basically transfer of those that the attorneys are dealing with.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all we have for today. Well, thanks for joining. And again, we have recorded this. We'll probably get it out tomorrow or Monday, if you want to refer back to it. And join us next month when we'll have a new topic.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.